Hey, it's your boy Easy, and on today's episode of Easy Opens, we're going to be taking a look at the Legacy Gold Ranger figure from Bandai. So let's go ahead and get this figure free from its plastic prison, take a look and see what we think about the Gold Ranger. Alright, so here he is, fresh out the box with all of his accessories. Well, accessory, because Bandai hates accessories, and if they don't have to give them to us, then they're not going to do that. And even if they should, they're still not, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So if you're not familiar with this character, he first made his appearance in the Super Sentai series O-Ranger, and he was the 6th Ranger. I think he was like some sort of child warrior from 600 million years ago. He flew a giant pyramid that turned into a robot. It was really cool. That's a fun series. Be sure to check it out if you haven't. But he made his first appearance here in the States on Power Rangers Zeo, where not only was this a new suit, it also marked the return of the original Red Ranger actor Austin St. John reprising his role as Jason, where the last time we saw Jason, he was running off with Trini and Zach to some peace summit, and we never saw them again, but it was really exciting to see Jason again, and not only see him, but him as this new Ranger in this awesome suit. That was a lot of fun. So there's a little bit of history for you. Let's go back and talk about the accessory. So the Gold Ranger comes with his signature weapon, which referred to in Power Rangers is known as the Golden Power Staff, but in O-Ranger it was referred to as the King Stick, which I like a lot better. But yeah, for the most part, it's spot on. I mean, it's looks the part. It's got a lot of detail in it, more than it probably should, or that you would think you would get out of a Bandai figure. But the downside is that it is flimsy and made of like a really loose and like just bendable plastic, so that's kind of a downside. But when they first revealed this figure, that they showed the weapon sliding up and down, like I believe it's the hilt would slide up and down in the show. It would do that, especially in O-Ranger. I guess in final production, as most things are, they changed it and made it to where it's just one static piece and it doesn't move. But in doing research for this review, I noticed that someone had posted, or I read somewhere, that in the Power Rangers footage that Saban used, most of the time that this weapon was seen, it was seen in the form that it is now, with the hilt all the way down. And it wasn't, I think it might have been one time shown like in a different position. But if you think of it that way, technically this isn't, this is screen accurate, and so there's no problem here. But it would have been nice if it could have moved, but what are you going to do? So the Gold Ranger stands at about 6.5 inches tall and is in a 1/12 scale of action figures. So having said that, let's go ahead and take a look and see how he measures up to some other figures you might have in your collection. So here's the Gold Ranger with the SH Figuarts Super Mario and NECA's Raphael figure. Here's the Gold Ranger with Storm Collectibles Scorpion figure and Marvel Legends Invisible Woman. Here he is next to SH Figuarts Chun-Li action figure and Marvel Selects Rhino figure. Here he is next to Figma's Gilgamesh figure and DC Collectibles Batman figure. Here he is next to the Legacy Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Green Ranger and White Ranger from the same line of figures. And here he is next to the Legacy Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Pink and Yellow Rangers from the same line of Legacy action figures. So if you're not familiar with this line, one thing that Bandai does in their Legacy line of 6-inch action figures is they reuse parts like crazy. So if they can reuse the arms, legs, chest, feet, hands, whatever, they're gonna do it. And now that's a standard practice for most toy companies, but it seems very weird. I don't know how to say it the right way, but it feels kind of like you're buying just a repaint of the same figure, and it's kind of at $20 that you're kind of like, oh, that's kind of rough. But you kind of have to give it to him because that's kind of what the show does. Like, the inspiration for the toy does that on its own, because most of the suits are just repaints of the other suits. So you can't really fault them for doing what the inspiration for the character in the show does anyway. So kind of have to give them a pass on that, but it is kind of hard when you're buying the regular, the main 5 of a line, and they're just all repaints of the same figure, basically. But that's not necessarily the case here, because this is the 6th Ranger in Zeo, and he's got some armor pieces that make him stand out, much like the rest of the 6th Rangers in this line. And when it comes to that, Bandai usually does a really good job, especially on the white and green Rangers, but here is no exception. They did a really good job as far as the detail in the armor. Like, it's got, I don't know what you would call it. It's like Sanskrit or hieroglyphics or something. I'm not really sure if I'm using those words correctly, but it looks like some sort of ancient Egyptian, not quite Egyptian, but like an alien form of like hieroglyphics, which is what the armor had on it in the show. And it's a pretty decent representation of that. They could have skimped on a lot of these details here in the wrists and in the shin guards and stuff, but they didn't. It's all there. And then the one cool thing is that, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the articulation part, but one thing they did is they separated the armor to where it's cut in the middle on the sides, so that it doesn't hinder articulation. But if I mentioned that in the articulation part, then forgive me. But that was a really cool idea to keep it from hindering the articulation and possibly breaking. But you don't notice it necessarily when you're posing the figure or just having them on a shelf. Like, you can't really tell that it's separated there. But anyway, but back to the detail on the armor, it looks really good, except the paint is where it suffers. This figure would have been way better if Bandai would have just put a little bit of black wash on this armor and make the detail that they took the time and effort to put into the figure actually pop out, as opposed to just blending into like one kind of just yellowy, cheesy looking armor piece. And that's the biggest downside to this figure. And this caused a huge uproar in the fan community, because what they showed us was a lot better, more gold looking armor when they revealed this figure. But what we got was I don't know, I saw a lot of people calling this some different variations of Cheese Ranger and stuff like that. And you can't really fault them for that, because it's what it looks like. It just doesn't look like, it looks fine on its own, kind of, but when you put it next to the white and the green Ranger, they've already done really good in this department as far as making armor look gold and shiny and like look better. To have them do this, it's really kind of inexcusable. This was a big misstep for them, in my opinion, and really a detriment to this figure overall. Because the rest of the paint, though, is just, like I've said, reuse of parts. So the feet, the boots and the gloves and the neck are all white, like some of the other Rangers. The rest of the body is just a basic black, and there's really not a lot of problems there. I did have some weird parts on my left thigh and my figure's right bicep, like some just weird, it looks like glue, but it's not. I don't really know how to describe it, but for the most part, it's fine, other than the yellow that they used instead of gold. So anyway, that's going to do it for the sculpt and paint portion of this review. So let's go ahead and take a look at the articulation you're going to get out of this Gold Ranger figure. Alright, so let's take a look at the articulation you're going to get out of the Zeo Gold Ranger. So starting with his head, he has 360 rotation at the neck. He can also look up that far, and he can look down a little bit, but not much. His arms will go up about this high, or this far. He's got 360 rotation at the shoulder, but it's impeded by the shield, so that's might cause some problems. But he does have 360 rotation at the bicep. Double jointed elbows. You would think he would have a forearm swivel, but mine does not, or at least it doesn't appear to be. It might be stuck, but I don't think it does, and I don't want to break him. But he definitely has 360 rotation at the wrist, and you can also move the wrist up and down or side to side, depending on how you have the hand oriented. His legs will go out this far. They will go forward this far, and they can only go back about this far. Although he does have double jointed knees. Same thing as the forearm with the shin, or the leg, I guess, the calf. It looks like it should have a swivel, but mine doesn't. And again, I don't want to break him. But the ankles are on a swivel or a pivot. And yes, you get 360 rotation and front to back and a lot of movement in the ankle. He also has an ab crunch. There's not much of it, like just a little bit, just enough to where you can get some movement out of him. And he has 360 rotation at the waist. And yeah, that's it. That's going to be all the articulation you're going to get out of the Zeo Gold Ranger. So, as I mentioned in my other Power Ranger reviews, growing up, I always loved the Power Rangers, and I wanted to get the figures, but I hated the way they looked, and I hated their scale, so I never did. And so when Bandai announced this line, I was super excited because I was looking forward to getting some good Ranger figures that would go with the rest of my 6-inch 1/12 figure collection. And one of the first Rangers at the top of my list was the Zeo Gold Ranger. And so now I'm really super excited to have him on my shelf and in my collection, but I won't lie and say that I'm entirely happy with him because of the gold paint not being gold. Like, I'm completely crestfallen with this because, like, I wanted this figure to just stand out. And the way that he looked when they revealed him before he came out, he looked on par with what I was wanting, and that was exciting and, like, really cool, and I was super looking forward to it. And then to finally get him in hand and he just looks like this, it's really disappointing because they had all the elements to knock this one out of the park, considering not only had they made the prototype of it looking like perfect, or at least really close, but they've made the gold, or the white and the green Ranger with gold, that if they would have just done that, it would have looked immensely better. Outside of the paint, this figure is standard fare for this line of male action figures because the female figures are different, but as far as the male figures go, this is just like the rest of them. He's got all the basic articulation, the detail and stuff is on par with the other figures in this collection, if not maybe slightly a little more. Maybe not as much as the White Ranger, but more than the Green Ranger, I would say. This figure is fine in regards to this collection. It's so detrimental to this figure that they got the paint slightly, not even slightly, they got the paint completely wrong as far as his armor. Everything else is fine, and it's a good action figure for a representation of this character, but it could have been way better, and again, Bandai dropped the ball on this one. Now, thankfully, a lot of people have posted how-tos on how to mod this figure and give him the paint that he deserves, and sorry, that's just a funny sentence to say, but yeah, so I'm gonna try my hand at repainting this figure, and hopefully it will redeem him enough to where I'm no longer ashamed of this color. But like I said, when you compare it to when it's on its own, it's not terrible, but when it's with the other figures that have gold on them, it definitely shows that this figure just doesn't measure up. That's really unfortunate, and I hate to say that, but still, if you're a Ranger fan and you're collecting this line, I still say get this figure. And from everything I've seen, the mods are pretty simple. It's like, and the parts are so far apart that you won't risk messing the figure up too much. And as far as I've seen in the wild, this figure is pretty prevalent, so if you do mess it up and you want to get another one, then they're readily available. But it sucks that we have to resort to that, but what are you gonna do, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, this figure, still really cool. If you're getting this line, I recommend getting it because you want to be a completist, and he still looks really cool. It's just they dropped the ball on the paint, on the gold parts. So there you go. Alright, well, thanks so much for watching. That's going to do it for me today. If you liked what you saw, hit that like button. If you want to see more of me, hit that subscribe button as well. And if you want to hear more from me, go ahead and look in the description below, and you will see the links to my podcast, where we have Turtle Soup, where I talk with a friend of mine about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles every other week, and Daydream Nation, where I talk with a friend of mine every other week about a different record. So that's going to do it for me today. Thanks again so much for watching, and be sure to check back here often for more opening goodness right here on Easy Opens. Else time.